Harley's biggest secret just slipped out, and nobody was supposed to see this. Something inside the Street Glide story doesn't add up, and the deeper we looked, the darker it got. The company's silence was not an accident. The documents are not rumors, and what they reveal will shake the idea of American steel to its very core. If you've ever trusted that badge, this will hit hard. Stay till the end, because the truth Harley tried to bury is finally roaring to the surface. We bought a dream. We grew up believing that Harley-Davidson was more than a brand. It was an oath, a symbol of freedom that ran through every mile of American asphalt. The Street Glide was the crown jewel, the perfect mix of muscle and style, built for the long haul. When we swung a leg over that saddle for the first time, we weren't just buying a motorcycle, we were buying a promise. The chrome gleamed with pride, the sound roared with defiance. The Street Glide wasn't supposed to be a machine, it was meant to be an identity. But somewhere inside Milwaukee's boardrooms, that identity became a product line. And while we were polishing our tanks and planning cross-country rides, Harley was making decisions we never agreed. Recent investigations revealed that the company concealed extensive reports of quality control failures tied directly to the Street Glide. They knew about the cracks in the armor, and they said nothing. What we thought was craftsmanship turned out to be compromise. It was hidden under layers of paint and marketing campaigns. We, the riders, put our trust in American steel. We thought buying a Harley meant supporting the kind of pride that built this country. Yet, those leaks show that somewhere along the line, that pride was traded for profit. Every roar of that engine suddenly becomes a question. How much of what we loved is still real? We didn't buy a machine. We bought a legend. And that legend betrayed us, and the betrayal didn't show up first in the headlines. It showed up on the road, the day the clutch failed. It always started the same way. You pull the clutch at a red light, the engine idles low, and for a split second, the lever feels soft, then nothing. The gear won't disengage. Traffic starts moving. Panic sets in. For countless Street Glide riders, that moment wasn't an anomaly. It was the start of a pattern. Thousands of us felt the clutch fail under our hand, the bike locking up in gear, sometimes right in the middle of intersections. Harley remained silent. Service centers muttered about isolated issues, but the numbers do not lie. Riders reported near-accidents, failed clutches, and shattered confidence. When the first recall came, it was wrapped in technical jargon and half-truths. Harley described it as a minor hydraulic fault. We knew better. A clutch failing without warning is not a minor issue. It is the line between control and catastrophe. For a company built on Brotherhood, the silence felt like treachery. We were told to stay loyal, to wait for parts, to believe in the system. But loyalty is a two-way street. When the bikes we paid for started turning against us, we realized something deeper. Harley didn't just let a flaw slip. They let down their riders. Every failed clutch was not just a malfunctioning part. It was a symbol that Brotherhood had been replaced by boardroom math. But a soft clutch wasn't the only thing that stopped working. Soon, the brakes did, too. If you've ever felt the gut punch realization that a brand you trusted let you down, hit the like button. That tells the world that riders still care about honesty. And leave a comment below, sharing your own Harley story. Because your voice proves this community is stronger than any corporate silence. Brakes stopping on the open road? You don't forget the moment the lever went dead. 1 second you're coasting. The next you squeeze and feel only air. It happened to riders on open highways and mountain passes. Even just rolling up to a stoplight. The Street Glide's brakes, especially the anti-lock system, began to fail. Because moisture became trapped and recalls were ignored. Riders found out the hard way that Harley's supposed safety systems weren't built to last through long winters or long trips. The recall letters came late, sometimes years after the first complaints. By then, some riders had crashed. Others who were lucky enough to catch the early warning signs were left stranded and waiting months for parts. Harley called it a maintenance oversight. We called it negligence. A brake failure on a machine that weighs over 800 pounds is not a statistic. It is a near-death experience. We trusted that badge with our lives. We trusted Harley when they said these machines were designed for freedom. Yet, when the brakes failed, what we felt was not freedom. It was terror. Those of us who survived the failure carry more than scars. We carry a new awareness. The company that taught America how to ride had forgotten how to stop. And if the brakes didn't end the ride, the oil under our boots almost did. Riders looking out for riders. Oil under our boots. At first, it looked like a small leak, a dark spot under the bike, a streak along the side of the crankcase. Then came the smell, the smoke, and the sudden slide. The oil line clamp failures on the Street Glide were not rare. They were routine. Thousands of riders reported it, and Harley brushed it off as a minor production hiccup. But when your rear tire hits a puddle of your own oil at 70 miles per hour, it is not minor, it is deadly. We started comparing notes. Different states, the same story. Leaks near the oil filter, oil splattering back onto the rider's leg, pressure warnings ignored until it was too late. Harley's official recall used careful language, downplaying the risk. They said a possible oil leak could occur. We said a possible life could end. The difference between those sentences tells you everything about who still rides for passion, and who just counts the profit. And here is what hurts the deepest. Those leaks were known internally, long before we ever saw them. The documents proved it. Engineers logged the reports. Suppliers flagged the weak clamps. Yet, the line kept running. Why? Because redesigning a part costs money. Recalling loyalty does not. We used to think oil under our boots was part of the charm, a sign of a well-ridden bike. Now we know better. That slick streak on the asphalt is not nostalgia, it is evidence. The company told us to keep riding, to keep trusting, but trust can only take you so far, before it turns into denial. And when we found out they knew it all, that is when the faith broke. The memos we weren't supposed to see. When the first leaks appeared on forums, most of us thought they were rumors, angry words from riders who felt cheated, but then the documentation surfaced. They were not stories, they were memos, real ones, signed, dated, and stamped with Harley's internal seals. They showed meetings where engineers pleaded for fixes that would have only cost a few dollars per bike. Management denied them one by one, calculating the warranty risk as if it was just another budget line. They didn't see riders, they saw statistics. They put math over miles. Inside those pages, you can almost hear the tension. Engineers writing about parts wearing out too soon, oil lines splitting under pressure, and bearings that wouldn't last half their expected lifespan. The very people who designed the heart of the Street Glide were watching it fail, and begging for production to stop. Until the issues were resolved, their emails described an unacceptable risk to rider safety. The reply from management was brief and chilling. Continue with the current design until further notice. That further notice never came. Reading those words felt like opening a wound we didn't know we had. Every mile, every vibration we once called character, suddenly felt like corporate negligence. They told us the Street Glide was tested beyond reasonable limits, but the truth is, the test data was massaged to conceal the faults. We were not paranoid, we were right. Harley knew. Their flagship touring model was built on compromises that could hurt us, and they still pushed it out the door. But memos don't build motorcycles, factories do, and that is where the next layer of betrayal was hidden. The quality control legends. The Milwaukee factory used to be a temple of pride. Generations of craftsmen built the bikes that defined American freedom, but inside those walls, during the Street Glide era, that pride turned into process charts and production quotas. Former workers say the phrase quality control lost its meaning. The check became a box to tick, not a promise to keep. Bikes rolled off the line. Because the schedule mattered more than the standard, you could walk the floor and see the difference. The old-timers, who measured every tolerance by feel, were replaced or sidelined. New managers talked about efficiency, not excellence. Parts that failed initial tests were readjusted, until they were just good enough. The goal wasn't to make it perfect, it was to get it out the door. Workers who questioned the changes were told to keep quiet, or find another job. Pride was replaced by pressure. The ones who stayed did their best, patching up flaws they weren't allowed to fix. One machinist described tightening oil line clamps by hand, even though the torque specs were wrong, because he didn't want to send out a bike that might bleed oil on the highway. That kind of quiet defiance became its own resistance, but it shouldn't have been necessary. We thought Harley's badge meant built to last. It turned out to mean built to budget. The very steel that once symbolized rebellion was melted down into compliance. And as the assembly line ignored the warning signs, the fault didn't stop at the factory. It was shipped right to us. The warranty game. When the faults began to pile up, riders went to their dealerships expecting help. Instead, they got paperwork, denial letters, excuses, aggressively written about aftermarket modifications, improper maintenance. The company told us to ride hard. Now it was using that spirit against us. They said we abused our bikes. We called it riding. Behind the scenes, leaked service documents explained why. Harley had quietly set denial targets, percentages of claims that should be rejected, to keep costs low. Dealers were instructed to look for any reason, no matter how small, to avoid coverage. A missing oil change receipt, rejected. A different air filter, rejected. Even bikes that were never saw a wrench outside the dealership were denied. Every rejected claim saved the company a few $100s, and every dollar saved was marked as recovered profit to the riders. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. We bought loyalty. We thought that after years of paying a premium price, Harley would stand by us when their machine failed. Instead, they turned the warranty into a wall. Riders began to realize the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed, to protect the corporation, not the community. That is when our loyalty began to shift. The people caught in the middle of that shift were not corporate strategists. They were the ones behind the counter, the dealers in the crossfire. Walk into a small-town Harley dealer, and you'll feel it immediately. The tension in the air, the discomfort behind the smile. Dealers used to be the face of the brand, the local ambassadors for Milwaukee's pride. But as the scandals and the warranty battles began to pile up, those same dealers were stuck between two loyalties: the corporation that supplied their bikes, and the riders who took them at their word. Some tried to play it straight, quietly helping customers even when the corporation said no. They would push warranty claims through, eat the labor cost, and hope the goodwill would keep their shop afloat. Others towed the line, blaming riders for problems they knew were real. Either way they lost. When parts shortages hit, shops sat on partially repaired bikes for months, forced to explain delays they didn't cause. Customers grew angry, and the frontline workers absorbed it all. Some dealers spoke off the record, revealing threats from corporate reps about denying too many repairs. "We used to sell freedom, now we sell apologies," one man once said. As our family dealers became as stranded as we were, forced to defend what they didn't break, many shuddered. Others bent the rules to survive a storm, born in distant boardrooms. When the corporation shut down on us, we turned to each other, the forum detectives. When the company went silent, we got louder. Late at night, garages across the country lit up with laptop screens and disassembled engines. Riders who used to argue over chrome plating began comparing replacement VIN numbers. The forums turned into war rooms. Someone posted a screenshot of a dealer bulletin, another dropped a scanned memo, and soon, we were connecting the dots, faster than any newsroom could. We weren't waiting for Harley's answer anymore. We were building our own. It started small. One rider mapping out failures by production date, another tracking patterns between specific schematics. By the end of the month, we had VIN lists, spreadsheets, and timelines that told the real story. The Street Glide did not fail randomly. It failed systematically, and we could prove it. Every time a new recall was issued, riders already knew what part would break next. We became our own recall department, funded by frustration. But as the truth spread through the forums, a new reality hit us. It wasn't just our engines that were broken, it was the value of our bikes, our pride, and our investments. The price of lost trust. Every rider knew it. A Harley used to be money in the bank. You could buy one, ride it for years, and still sell it for close to what you paid. The Street Glide was the crown jewel of that economy. But when the leaks went public, the market crashed overnight. Prices plummeted like loose bolts on a bad road. Riders who spent decades treating their bikes as relics suddenly couldn't give them away. It wasn't just about the resale value, it was about the betrayal of faith. A rider in Ohio shared how his 2015 Street Glide, once appraised at $20,000, couldn't fetch 10 grand. Another in Arizona tried to trade his in for a newer model, only to be told the dealer wasn't taking them anymore. The phrase death rattle became a negotiating term. Mechanics whispered about it. Buyers steered clear of it. Our machines, once symbols of pride, became rolling reminders of corporate greed. Harley didn't just devalue a motorcycle, they devalued a legacy. We bought these bikes, believing they were investments in identity, rolling monuments to freedom. Now they were liabilities. Owning a Harley for the first time felt like holding stock in a company that betrayed its shareholders, the riders themselves. We didn't lose money, we lost faith. And that loss revealed something even bigger. This was not just one bad bike. The contagion spread across the lineup. If you've made it this far, you're part of something bigger than a video. You're part of a movement demanding the truth on two wheels. Beyond the Street Glide. Once we had the data, it was impossible not to see it. The Street Glide was not an exception, it was a symptom. Reports from Electroglide owners, Road King, and Ultra Classic began pouring in. The same failures, the same denials, the same hollow apologies. This was not a bad batch. It was a bad philosophy. Harley applied the same cost-cutting logic across multiple touring platforms, hoping reputation would cover the cracks. But as the first cracks widened, the entire image began to crumble. Some of us wanted to believe the company would learn. Instead, we saw recycled designs and rebranded fixes. A new gasket here, a renamed part there, cosmetic solutions for mechanical decay. Even newer models showed signs of the same shortcuts. The deeper we dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't about engineering, it was about priorities. Harley stopped building for the rider and started building for the balance sheet. The rebellion grew from frustration into mission. We began warning new buyers, posting inspection guides, even meeting up in garages to show each other how to replace the defective parts. Independent mechanics hosted free workshops, teaching riders what the company wouldn't. Every wrench turn in those garages was a protest. Every rebuilt engine was a middle finger to corporate indifference. We were no longer customers. We were the custodians of a legacy, too important to leave in the wrong hands. And as the rebellion grew loud, the noise was no longer background chatter. It became undeniable evidence, turning the noise into evidence. At first, Harley treated us like static, just a few angry riders making noise online, but that noise began to form patterns, and those patterns turned into proof. We documented every failure, every rejected claim, every letter the company ignored. Screenshots turned into spreadsheets, spreadsheets into reports, and reports into a movement. Riders who had never met in person coordinated investigations that rivaled professional audits. The evidence was undeniable, and the mainstream media finally paid attention. A journalist from Milwaukee picked up our story, tracing it back to the leaked memos and internal accounts. What started as a community effort became a national headline. Suddenly, Harley couldn't pretend. The forums were just digital gossip. Law firms reached out. Regulators began asking questions. The company tried to issue new statements, softer words, promises of transparency. But we had read those memos. We knew better. They ignored our emails until the numbers went viral. That was the turning point. For years, Harley controlled the story. Legacy, freedom, rebellion. But as the riders took control of the truth, that story was cracked wide open. We didn't need their marketing anymore. We had our truth, our documentation, our brotherhood. We proved that a community can do what corporations refuse to do, to protect the people who actually live on two wheels. And once Washington got hold of that information, Harley's problems left the garage and entered Congress. The regulators stepped in. For years, Harley acted like no one could touch them. They wrapped themselves in chrome and heritage, relying on the legend to shield them from accountability. But legend doesn't silence evidence. When the forum data leaked, the memos, and the rider testimony finally reached Washington, the narrative changed. Investigators from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration started asking the questions that Harley spent decades avoiding. Suddenly, the company that once defined rebellion was being forced to answer. Hearings were scheduled. Subpoenas landed in Milwaukee. Federal inspectors demanded access to the same internal reports that riders had begged to see for years. The tone of Harley's press releases changed overnight, from denial to cooperation, from pride to panic. For the first time, the balance of power shifted to the riders. Finally, someone with power listened to the people without it, a mechanic said, during a televised hearing. The investigation laid bare everything we already knew: the ignored warnings, the falsified inspection records, and the profits over safety decisions that read like a checklist of betrayal. Regulators issued fines, but the real penalty wasn't financial, it was moral. The company's name, once synonymous with freedom, was now linked to deception. Riders watched with mixed emotions. Justice was coming, but it felt hollow. We shouldn't have needed Washington to make them listen. But justice didn't just come from the courtroom, it also rose up from the factory floor. The workers drew the line. Inside the Milwaukee plant, something shifted. The very workers who had been silent began to speak up. They built these machines bolt by bolt, believing they were constructing symbols of pride. Now they realized the company had gambled with that pride. For years, union meetings became packed. The voices that had been silenced through layoffs and restructuring began to rise. We build bikes, not balance sheets, one welder said, pounding his fist on a table. It wasn't just about the bad parts. It was about the broken trust. The workforce saw management ignore their warnings, outsource components, and push for impossible production targets. Skilled machinists who used to sign off on perfection were told to keep the line moving, but the scandal gave them leverage. Workers refused overtime until new safety standards were restored. Engineers demanded total transparency in quality testing. They weren't striking for money, they were striking for integrity. The media began to call it the rebellion. Inside the rebellion, Harley executives tried to paint it as routine labor noise, but everyone knew it was bigger. It was a reckoning inside the walls. The very people who built the Street Glide were demanding back the meaning of wearing the badge. Pride was no longer a slogan. It was an act of resistance. The workers drew their line, and for the first time, management had to listen. While the factory fought for its soul, the brand itself was on trial in the court of public opinion. The brand on trial. Harley-Davidson is more than a company. It is an identity. It sells freedom, rebellion, and legacy in every tank, every badge, and every commercial. But as the scandals broke, that image shattered. Investors panicked, stock prices dropped, and analysts began using the words that Harley had long avoided: moral collapse. For the first time in its history, the company's greatest asset, its legend, had become its greatest liability. The question echoed across the industry: did Harley forget who built their empire? Riders began to speak louder than shareholders. Rallies that once celebrated new models turned into protests demanding accountability. "You can't brand trust," one veteran shouted at a press event. The message was clear. Harley's future would not be decided in boardrooms, but in the hearts of the riders who kept it alive. The corporate apologies came out sleek and empty, promising reform, sustainability, and a renewed commitment to customer satisfaction. We had heard it all before. Words don't fix stripped bolts. Yet, something beautiful emerged from the chaos. Independent builders and small American shops began to thrive. Custom mechanics who were once overshadowed by factory prestige became heroes again. The old spirit of rebellion returned. But this time it wasn't Harley selling it, it was the riders reclaiming it. The brand may survive the scandal, but the soul of Harley now belongs to the people who refused to let it die. And as the smoke cleared, one truth remained: the road ahead belongs to us. Our road ahead. This story was never just about engines or memos. It was about trust, brotherhood, and the right to demand honesty from those who claimed to ride with us. The Street Glide scandal ripped open everything Harley tried to hide, but it also revealed something stronger: the unity of riders who refused to be silenced. We've proven that a community, armed with truth, is more powerful than a corporation armed with lawyers. Now it's time to decide what comes next. If you own a Harley, check your VIN, and know what's truly under your tank. Speak up, document every flaw, and support the independent builders who value craft over cost. Every honest mile you ride proves the legend belongs to us, not corporations. The open road is ours, and the roar means freedom, only when it's built on truth. The rebellion isn't over, it's just shifting gears. When the engines go quiet, truth is the only sound that matters. We've exposed the lies, the losses, and the riders who paid the price. But this isn't the end, it's ignition. The road ahead belongs to us now. Keep riding, keep questioning, and never let loyalty silence honesty again. Stay loud.